that we love questions from the audience. So you can start commenting your questions now, or you can also add them as we go. I'll be right back on to welcome our guests to the show. For coffee. Watco Logistics makes supply chains simple. Whether it's rail, road, river, ocean, or intermodal, they manage your supply chain with efficiency and care. From heavy haul trucking to e-commerce fulfillment, they tailor solutions that fit your business, no matter the size or the complexity. Watco combines smart technology with real human insight to keep your cargo moving and your operations running smoothly. You can learn more about their full suite of services at watco.com/logistics. Good morning, everybody. I put a comment in this morning just now while I was watching that commercial because I want to let everybody know I'm a little under the weather today, which is actually good for everyone listening in because then you get to hear Mazen talk more than me, which is why you're all here. So I will be counting on him to really carry the microphone today. But my question was, sometimes I ask like what your coffee orders are, what your favorites are. Today, I want to know what your favorite cough drop is, because I had someone once when I was on a conference circuit doing all these conferences and losing my voice in the fall tell me that they just keep cough drops in their pocket. And I thought that was kind of brilliant. So what's the best cough drop for not losing your voice when you're conferencing and networking? Would love to hear your guys' recommendations because I'm heading to JOC Inland Distribution Conference next week. So I have to kick this cold because I will be speaking. I'll be moderating an awesome panel about cross-border supply chain. And I will be podcasting for 2 days. So 2 days full of speaking and podcasting, and I need my voice to work. So bless me with your recommendations, please. Also, just before we start, I just want to give a quick thank you to our sponsor, Watco Logistics. You guys saw the commercial, but very, very grateful for them. We get to do a bunch of fun collaborations and things like that. And so just want to remind everyone that they do really cool solutions across rail and intermodal, and they're on all these short lines, and they do bulk, and they just acquired a new company too to expand in the heavy haul space. But they also are really killer at OTR, domestic transportation. So full truckload, LTL, e-commerce. They do a great job, and I love the teams there. They really love to put together unique solutions that spans like multiple modes, some modes that I honestly had never thought of before meeting them. I've been in logistics for 7 years, and I never thought of how barge logistics works. So really cool people, really cool team. Okay, that's it for me. I'm about done talking for the day. So I'm going to go ahead and bring on our guest for today. Mazen, thank you so much for being here and joining me today.
Thank you, Samantha, and good morning. Good morning, everyone. So my favorite cough drop is honey. These honey cough drops, I think they do wonders for me. I'm also sitting here with my favorite cup of coffee from Uber Freight and
I like it.
my favorite coaster, which I got from MIT, which is a pallet coaster.
Oh, cute. I'm gonna need you guys to send me an Uber Freight mug. I got all of my coffee cups. I just realized the other day are freight brand companies that I've picked up at conferences and stuff. So I have all the different mugs with logos on them. Oh, I have to do backwards things. Yeah, and so I love it because it's like my now husband, guys. I got married a couple weeks ago, so I have to say husband.
Congratulations.
My husband takes coffee cups to work, and it's always like a different freight company on his coffee cups. So Mazen, I looked back. You've been on my podcast before. I was like, oh, that was like a year ago. No, I think it's been like 2.5 years already since we had that episode. And I went back and listened to it, and we were at kind of the beginning. Well, it looks like the beginning now, but we were in the beginning of this down freight market, and it was about this time of year. So it was like fall. And we were talking about, are we going to see a recovery through peak, through end of year? And a lot of people were calling for that. And you actually, I would say you were more skeptical that that was going to happen, which ended up being obviously very accurate because now here we are 2 years later. So I'm looking forward to catching up with you and just hearing kind of what's happened. But I'd like to first start and get your thoughts on what has happened the last 2.5 years. We kind of all know, we hear a lot on the show about the demand side. I was kind of hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the supply side of our industry and what's been going on over the last couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of things have happened in the last 2.5 years, like maybe like too many things to count, from hurricanes to bankruptcies to large events to tariffs to all of these huge things. But also you can argue that nothing happened in the last 2.5 years, because when you look at the freight market, spot rates and contract rates has still been like flat for almost 2.5 years now. So you can argue either way, like either a lot of things happened in the last 2 years or nothing has happened in the last 2 years. And this is like, as I said, it's like really hard to predict. A lot of forecasts have been revised downwards in the last 2.5 years. People have been expecting the market to turn again and again. And it's hard to predict the market. So we try to decompose it into the supply side and the demand side, looking at what you're seeing on both supply and demand. They both have their own stories, so we'll cover these today. But as you said, we'll start with the supply side. So when you look at the supply side, we look at two things. So we look at how many drivers are there and how many trucks are there in the market. For drivers data, we look at data from the BLS, which I'll be talking about that today extensively. And we look at data of truck orders, truck sales, which we get from some of our data partners. So we get a comprehensive view of what's happening within all of that for hire and private fleet market as well. So the BLS data was telling us until a couple of months ago that employment has been flat for almost a year and a half. So trucking employment, when we talk about trucking employment, we thought that carriers have been maintaining their headcount, not increasing their headcount, but also not decreasing it for almost a year and a half right now. But as we all know, there are some extensive revisions that happened to the BLS data, and they were pretty significant. So we saw the significant revisions across the whole economy, where we thought that the economy had like hundreds of thousands of jobs, more than what we initially expected.
Yeah.
This was the same in the freight market as well. So the amount of supply that was stated in the original surveys, when benchmarked against the QCEW survey, which is used for annual benchmarking of the BLS data, it now shows that the number of employees in the truckload sector is much lower than what we initially expected or what we initially thought it was. And that leads us to think that capacity is still exiting the market in significant amounts. So capacity is still exiting the market. When we look at that index, truckload employment specifically, it is significantly below where we were prior to the pandemic in 2019, 2020. So we are about like 3% below that level of employment that we saw just before the pandemic. And we all know what happened afterwards. Where the pandemic happened, initially we saw a capacity crunch, and then we had a huge buildup of capacity until 2023. From 2023 and onwards, we have been seeing that capacity has been exiting the market consistently. And the latest signs we have from the QCEW survey show that capacity is still exiting the market. And now it dipped below the pre-pandemic levels.
I find that interesting because I think that sometimes when you have like a first row seat into a market, you kind of have a pulse on it, right? And I feel like some people's gut instincts were right in this case because we've like been feeling this. Like brokers here, like their carriers are closing their doors. They're losing drivers. They're cutting back. But we weren't seeing it. Like we weren't getting that number from the data. And I didn't even think about trucking, like the labor being affected, but I wrote about how extensive those revisions were across the entire economy for jobs. You know, I mean, we went from like, wasn't it like over 100,000 a month to like 20,000 or like no, I mean, it was dramatic revisions. And so, yeah, that was kind of the first, by the time we had those revisions, it was like a crack that showed in the labor market. And that's what I think kind of spurred this quarter point rate cut we just got. But it's interesting to see that obviously labor market as a whole, but also the trucking labor market was affected by that. So do we expect to continue to attract more supply over the coming months, or where do we stand right now?
Yeah, so I would expect that to continue because when you look at, so we develop an index at Uber Freight, which is the cost per revenue mile of trucking. So we take that data from the ATRI, we take data from BLS, from multiple sources, and we try to build a monthly index predicting the cost per revenue mile, which accounts for empty miles that truck drivers and trucking carriers are not paid for, right? So when we compare that index to spot rates and contract rates, we see that it's already 20% above spot rates. So carriers are losing a lot of money on the spot market. They're losing 20 cents on every dollar they make in the spot market. Operating costs are also starting to go a little bit over contract rates, which means that even contract carriers are losing money in this market. So especially when you account for all the costs, of course, from depreciation to maintenance to tractors, trailers, etc. So there's a question here: why are these carriers still in the market? Well, they're still in the market because a lot of them have already bought their tractors and trailers. They already paid for them when the market was good. So they're in economics, we want to make a distinction between the fixed costs and the variable costs. And as long as your income is above the variable cost, you stay in business until you need to replace your equipment or renew your equipment or to reinvest in fixed costs. So as long as the variable costs, which is just like drivers and fuel and tolls and some regular maintenance, as long as these costs are below the spot rates and contract rates, then we expect these drivers to stay in the market, these carriers to stay in the market. But then there will come a time where they need to invest in equipment, in new trucks, new trailers, and that's why we see them exiting the market. So as long as this long-term trend of total operating cost per revenue mile remains higher than spot and contract rates, we expect that capacity will continue to exit the market. Right now, what carriers are doing is just like pushing the problem into the future. They're putting more miles on these tractors. Yeah. They're driving them more. If you look at the ATRI report, they show that the annual mileage on a truck has increased from 80,000 in 2023 to 83,000 in 2024. So that was a significant increase. The working days have increased from 240 almost to 270. So they're trying to get more efficiencies. If you look at the BLS data, we see that they're hiring drivers at lower wages. So in the truckload sector, the wages are 1.5% lower year over year. If you compare that to other sectors in the economy, it's about like 4% higher. So while wages in the broader economy are growing, wages in the truckload sector are decreasing. So what carriers are doing is trying to get these efficiencies, to get more utilization out of their existing fleets instead of adding more to their fleets, but also they're pushing the problem into the future, because by doing that, they're shortening the lives of these tractors and trailers. So they're not solving the problem. This is not sustainable.
Yeah. We're also hiring, drivers working on lower pay scales tends to equate to more violations, more safety issues, things like that too, that are um, it's just not a good market for that to be having, claims because you didn't properly block and brace loads and things like that as well, or you're struggling KPIs with your shippers. Um, so I mean, I'm usually such an optimist. I've been struggling lately. So I think the next 6 months look pretty gloomy to me. And so I would agree with you on the continued attrition side of things with some of our supply. Um, what can you kind of walk me through a few things that potentially we could look at as far as is there any hope for manufacturing in the next 6 months? Or I'm also curious about August. Was it the August data? Which obviously we're looking at government data, there's a bit of a lag, but the August consumer spending data on goods was strong. And so I've said, we don't have a spending problem. Our volumes in consumer goods haven't been down. It's just that we've had a supply problem. And I think also consumer goods are one part of freight volumes, right? But it's not all of it. So maybe it's been the weakening kind of manufacturing hasn't really uh, has been enough to outweigh this consumer demand. But I would love your thoughts on all things manufacturing, consumer spending, and the like.
Yeah, definitely. So we can break these down one by one. But before closing on supply, so one of the things that we should mention on that point as well is that
Sure.
we are seeing the lowest level of tractor and trailer sales in years. So
Yeah.
if you look at that data,
Is that for
carriers are
used
not buying
equipment
trucks.
too, or just new?
New. So when you
Yeah.
look at new tractors, new trailers, we're seeing the lowest levels we've seen at least since 2020, when the COVID pandemic started and no one was ordering anything. So we're almost at that level now, which is very, very gloomy from a carrier's point of view.
I was told by an executive at a trailer leasing company that typically Q3 is when you lock in orders for the next year for trailer and truck manufacturing. So I'm curious how that went, if we're gonna see any releases and new orders coming, or I would guess I don't know how if you didn't have the certainty to make that call a couple months ago, you would have made it right, in Q3 now, so
Yeah, so when we talk about Q3, it's just seasonality that could be driving these orders. But when we compare year over year to take that effect of seasonality away, we see how bad the current levels of tractor and trailer orders are.
yeah.
So it's the same with spot market, right? Like we see spot rates rising in June and July, but then we know it's just seasonality. So it doesn't tell us anything. To really get the full picture, we either have to deseasonalize the data like the economists do, or to look at year over year trends, like compared to last year, are we higher or lower? And I think we're about year to date, we're about more than 30% lower for trailer orders and more than 15% lower for tractor orders, which tells you that carriers are very pessimistic about this market.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
and I can think a few industries that were probably hit harder on tariffs than a trailer that's made of steel and aluminum.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's just, two of your largest inputs, were not exempt from certain tariffs, and so, in a face of falling demand, you also have increasing costs. It was a really bad
Yeah.
recipe for the manufacturers in those sectors.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, you brought up a very good question about consumer spending, and the consumer spending is every month almost is a new all-time high, but we continue to see a freight recession going on. So I get this
Yeah,
question all the time, like what's really going on? Like if
yeah,
all of this, if we're seeing all of this spending, if the consumer remains resilient, what's happening to the freight market? And it's interesting because I was looking at this data just a couple of weeks by sector. So instead of looking at the total dollar amount, I was looking at it by sector, and I noticed I looked at six different sectors. Three of them were doing much better than their pre-pandemic trends, and three of them were doing much worse than their pre-pandemic trends. So
interesting.
if you look at sectors which were doing better than the pre-pandemic trends, they included electronics, pharmaceuticals, so electronics, pharmaceuticals, and personal care products.
Okay.
When you look at sectors that were not doing well, these include like furniture and appliances. Of course, there's a housing
Of course.
recession. The automotive spending has been mostly flat after the pandemic, and food and beverages. They are not completely flat, but they're below their trends. And what does it tell us? Like the first three sectors, pharmaceuticals, electronics, personal care products, I try to think of them as low volume, high cost products, right? Because these are expensive items that do not take a lot of volume. So if you measure retail sales as the BLS does, or the census does, the census, in dollar amounts, you're gonna have a lot of dollars in your estimate, but not a lot of freight volume. While sectors that have not been doing well, food and beverages, furniture, appliances, they are high volume, low cost products. So these are the sectors that are not doing well, and that's why this strength that we see in consumer spending in the dollar amount does not translate to the freight market. So consumers are not spending in on categories that drive a lot of freight volumes. They're spending on sectors that drive a lot of dollar spending, but not a lot of freight volumes.
I think that's just a shift in how consumers behave in general, at least in the United States, right? Like we're gonna buy the brand new iPhone, but we cut back on buying our name brand cereals because inflation on groceries.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just kind of, I think that's like a macro evolving trend in how consumers behave. What about spending on services? Has that changed it meaningfully lately, or is that still kind of steady?
So I think in the last year or so, we've seen a slight slowdown. So we've seen a slowdown in spending on services. We've seen a slight slowdown in spending on durable goods, which are the first to take the hit usually when in economic downturns. Probably spending on durables slowed down after tariff announcements. Spending on services, it could be seen as a slightly negative sign, but we're not in any alarming territory yet. So it's not a recession level decrease of spending. It's just like a slowdown from last year's or the years before year-over-year growth rates. So we're definitely seeing a slowdown. An interesting trend to note here is that consumers have been spending more and more on e-commerce, or what we call non-store retailers. That is taking a larger share of retail sales. So when you look at retail sales for the last year and a half, almost, or 2 years, we see that one of the primary drivers of that increase in spending was always non-store retailers. So it always shows up on top as the top contributor to retail sales. And this also tells us about the changing patterns of consumer spending, right? Because we're getting shorter lengths of haul. So there was a report yesterday on freight waves showing that we're at the shortest length of haul in years. And this also has implications on tracking, right? Because shorter lengths of haul is less demand for freight. So all of this has implications there.
And shorter lengths of haul are typically more prime targets, correct, for autonomous trucking? Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah, is that correct?
Yeah.
And I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I know you're pretty involved in that space. When I started in the industry 7 years ago, autonomous trucking was like this thing of the far future, but I feel like we're in the far future now. So how close are we? And are we actually, do you think it's feasible to say that we're going to start seeing autonomous trucking kind of make up for some of this capacity we're attriting?
Yeah, that's interesting because I joined this space about like 6 years ago. I joined when Uber was working on autonomous driving. I joined this space in 2019, and even before during my PhD in the 4 years before that. For the last maybe 10 years or so, we were always saying that driverless cars are 2 years into the future, or 2 years from now.
Yeah.
And that timeline has been pushed again and again. So it was always 2 years from now. Until maybe a couple of years ago, because we saw all the big advances in AI, so all the huge advancements that no one was expecting them to be at this level of speed or at this level of adoption and growth. And definitely the autonomous trucking companies benefited from these advancements as well, and tried to incorporate them. So right now we can confidently say that it is 2 years from now. So it's no longer a guess, but we are seeing that in reality. So when we're looking at first, when you look at ride-hailing networks, they're picking up at extremely fast speeds. They're unlocking a different city every week, almost every couple of weeks. You can now or schedule a ride, and then a car will show up without a driver. We're not there yet when it comes to autonomous trucking, but we're heading in that direction, and also at a fast pace. So as you said, you're right. Short hauls are the first step there. Because of some technical difficulties, right? Like if you're in a piloting stage or a testing stage, you're not going to test from like Dallas to Chicago. You're going to test maybe on Dallas to Houston, or shorter lanes. But in the future, we expect both short hauls and long hauls to be viable targets for autonomous trucks. So right now we're still in mostly like the pilots and the testing stage. We're starting to have these commercial pilots. We have a few partners at Uber Freight that we're working with. In the next couple of years, we expect to see more safety drivers getting out of the trucks. And we expect to see more and more purely autonomous operations. The debate is still whether we'll see full depot to depot or like end-to-end models or hub-to-hub models. The hub-to-hub model seems like an easier starting point, but the unit economics are challenging there because you're adding 2 extra costs of the first mile and the last mile.
And more handling.
And all of that friction, yes. And also shipper facilities might not be ready for that. So we're always telling our shippers, well, if you want autonomous freight, if you want autonomous trucking, you have to make sure that your facilities are ready for that. You should do whatever it takes to facilitate these autonomous trucks coming to your facilities without a driver and loading or unloading. So that's where we stand now. I'm more optimistic than ever about the future of autonomous trucks. I believe in the technology. I get questions all the time whether it's safe or not, and my answer is, well, it's safer than a human driver. So I trust more than a human driver.
I've seen some people on the road that are highly questionable, so I wouldn't really argue with that. I might take my chances with a robot over a lot of people who drive today.
Yeah. I also look at the data. So 95% of accidents are human mistakes, human errors. This is a technology that sees 360 degrees around it. It can react in no time compared to a human driver, where the perception reaction time is about like 0 to 2 seconds. It can be.
We've already had that in cars. Like my 2019 Honda that I have can tell when a car in front of me is braking at a faster rate than I think it is, and like take control of the brakes for me to avoid a rear end collision. Is this true? Like it can literally tell better than I can how fast the slowdown on the highway ahead of me is happening.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, cool. I mean, I'm excited to see where it goes because it's been so long coming. And so we'll see in the next couple of years. Doesn't sound like that's a next 3 to 6 month thing, though. So I would like to ask you for your kind of Uber Freight's 3 to 6 month prediction on what we should expect here in the near term future as it pertains to freight.
So I think in the near term future, we're telling our shippers to continue to be cautious. So last year around this time, there were no signs of tightening whatsoever. There were like very minimal signs. This year, we're starting to see some signs, and there is a set of indicators you look at is split. So when you look at the spot rates or when you look at the tender rejections, they're not showing any signs of recovery. When you look at the demand, it's still maybe like slightly positive year over year, but still in a very depressed environment. Right. Especially on the manufacturing side and the housing side. But when you look at supply, it has mostly left the market. All of that excess capacity has left the market. There are some other sets of indicators that we look at that show some market tightening. If you look at like some load to truck ratios, or if you look at the spot volumes, they're starting to pick up. So there are definitely some indicators that are telling us that the market is starting to tighten. But that doesn't mean that these indicators have been showing that pattern for a while now. So it doesn't mean that the market will tighten right away. So we built our forecasts. We built our confidence intervals around our forecasts. We look at external forecasts, and maybe like 3/4 of these forecasts that we build and look at are predicting the soft market to stay for next year, but there's a quarter of these that are predicting some tightening. So the risk to the upside is higher than the risk to the downside. So we tell our shippers to be cautious at Uber Freight. We tell them that, hey, be prepared to reprice if the market changes. Be prepared for any changes next year. Do not go just after rates and go with risky carriers just because you're going after rates. Invest in your relationships. So we tell shippers, just be prepared. Like, put that as a possible scenario that can actually happen, even if it's not the actual expected scenario. It's like cautiousness in the market. It's like just a level of cautiousness without having to be like either too optimistic or too pessimistic about the market. It's just that we're starting to see some signs that the market might change. What does it take? I would say that on the supply side, we've already seen a correction. We shouldn't expect much more on that front. Now it's up to demand to recover, and that is something that depends on first the manufacturing sector. Also, we cannot trust the manufacturing index because that also represents a lot of growth in semiconductors and electronics, which is the same issue that I was describing earlier with consumer goods. So when we adjust that index to the actual level of freight volumes being moved, it's about 5% below where we were like 2 or 3 years ago, even though the index has remained flat, the Fed index has remained flat. So manufacturing needs to recover, especially in industries that drive freight volumes, with beverages, appliances, furniture, etc. And speaking of appliances and furniture, well, what drives these is the housing sector. It's the housing market.
I was gonna say, that sounds like a housing market.
So this is a huge drag on the freight market. I was optimistic in the housing market a couple of weeks ago when we were expecting rate cuts. Well, unfortunately, we saw rate cuts and mortgage rates went up after that, which usually happens, and everyone is surprised after that.
Let me tell you, the day after the quarter point cut, I got an email from my business bank saying, we're lowering your interest on your business checking by 0.3% because of the Fed's activity. And I'm like, oh, so some sectors are real quick to jump on it and, in a way that doesn't help us consumers, right?
Exactly. But mortgage rates went up, so that's bad news for the housing sector. And the housing
finally got a rate cut, like we've been talking about, and the mortgage rates did the opposite of what we wanted to see. That sounds about on par for the course for this freight market lately. So I want to just ask a question to close. A lot of I think the people that listen to the show, hopefully, the reason I started the show, the reason I write a newsletter, is because I wanted to be more prepared and better understand like where we're headed so we can make smarter business decisions. Everyone's playing a part of a business in this industry, right? This is a huge industry. We have trucking companies, we have brokerages, we have all these shippers representing manufacturing and service verticals. And we're trying to make budget decisions and we're trying to plan. And when I started writing and covering all of this like 3-4 years ago, we could put quite a bit of weight in certain economic data releases or certain data points. And I just feel like I've kind of watched the reliability of some of those things waver in the last couple of years. So I was just curious to get your thoughts on like, we can't give up. We can't just throw our hands up and say, well, nobody knows what's going to happen anymore and just stop planning. But like, how have you kind of evolved in your stance on how you keep up? And I guess a good question is, has the reliability of data changed in the last couple of years, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it has. I wouldn't say that it has definitely changed in a significant amount, but we've always had data revisions with the BLS or with government data. My advice comes from one of my favorite books actually. It's called Super Forecasting. I don't know if you've heard about that book.
I have not.
But it's a book about forecasting. This professor had the challenge of super forecasters and tried to identify what are the characteristics of people who are good at forecasting and people who are bad at forecasting.
Okay.
And he makes this he distinguishes between what he calls the fox and the hedgehog. So there are two types of personalities. He calls them the fox and the hedgehog. The hedgehog is attached to a single idea. He looks at a single indicator. They are obsessed with this indicator. They don't look at the broad range of data points, and they make conclusions from a single data point. And that's what we want to avoid. Well, the fox is smarter. She looks at a broader range of indicators from different data sources, from different points of view, and tries to combine all of these to reach a more viable conclusion. So my advice is be a fox. Do not look at a single data source or a single data point. Look at the broad range, because some of these might have significant revisions, some of these might be inaccurate. But then when you're looking at enough indicators, at a significant amount of indicators, that bias is going to cancel out and you'll be able to make better predictions, better forecasts about the future. So that's what we do at Uber Freight. We look at a ton of indicators. We build a database of thousands of economic indicators. Every month we update it. We try to build predictive models from thousands of indicators instead of just like 4 or 5. We use AI, we use data science, we use machine learning and all of that. So we try to be a fox, and my advice to everyone is be a fox.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really good. I like to, I don't get to consume thousands of articles and things like that, but I do enjoy, when I'm prepping for my newsletters, I enjoy intentionally reading people who I know tend to be more pessimistic versus more optimistic on certain matters. And I like to kind of read across the spectrum of opinions, stay on like one labor data release. I like to read people who take it different ways and then kind of like stitch all that together and think like, what would the middle ground look like? Like what can we take from this? There's upside, downside risks to it. So yeah, I agree with that. Mazen, it's been amazing having you on today. If anyone has questions, they want to hear more about the work you're doing at Uber, autonomous trucking, anything they heard that interested them, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, definitely. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Mazen Danaf, my name shows here on the screen. Also on X, Freight Econ, at Freight Econ. So I should get better with these updates. I'm very active on social media recently, but I'll respond to any questions we receive.
Awesome. Still not on X. I'm still not there. Maybe one day I'll get there, because people, I've been hearing more X handles are like, oh, I'm on X, and I'm like, oh, I'm not. I'm missing out.
So it's interesting for me because I get the two different populations. So most of the my audience on LinkedIn is shippers mostly, and shipper and supply chain professionals. My audience on X tends to be more carrier concentrated. So it's carriers, truck drivers, it's owner operators. Yeah. So I try to reach these two populations with my updates, but I should be doing a better job with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And to anyone who's listening, if you're going to be heading to Chicago next week for the JOC Inland Distribution Conference, be sure to reach out to me. I will be there. The podcast will be there. Hopefully my voice will be there and be recovered, because it's going to be a busy few days there in Chicago. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. And I'm getting some cough drop recommendations. I need that. Appreciate you for being here. Mazen, thanks for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for meeting us for coffee. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for meeting us for coffee. I'm so excited to be partnered with Watco as our show sponsor. Not only was Watco founded in my home state of Kansas, but the solutions they provide are, in my honest opinion, unmatched. If you have questions about Watco, you can scan this QR code to connect, check out the link in the episode description, or you can shoot me a message on LinkedIn directly, and I'm happy to talk more. If you enjoyed today's show, I'd love if you could leave a rating on your platform of choice. We'll see you next time.